am Countess Finola, or lately Mama Finola. I have been quest writing for, I want to say 10 years of good quests, and then a couple of early not so good quests. But I mean, everyone starts somewhere, right? I'm going to go over the basics of quest writing, why quest writing. This is just a very, very light beginner primer. I do have information on more specifics that I can offer people who are more interested, but I wanted to give everyone kind of a baseline. So with that, we're going to start with, what is a quest? A quest is organized roleplay, but it is not necessarily scripted roleplay. And the difference there is, a script is exactly like a play, right? You have exactly what you plan to happen written out, and you perform it. That's not necessarily what a quest is. Now, don't get me wrong, sometimes you include scripts. Think NPCs in early video games. Welcome to Conaria. I like swords. But you want to kind of stay away from that because it doesn't feel organic. Much better to give your NPCs a reason. Now, by organized roleplay, what I mean is you have certain ideas set out, a loose plot. This is not a novel. It's not going to necessarily go where you plan it to go. And with quests, PCs can always do things you are not expecting. You can plan for 99 things and they will do the 100th thing. Good quests typically have a balance of combat challenges, obviously not online quests for reasons, puzzles, physical challenges, and roleplay scenarios that basically you have to talk your way out of. Now, what a good balance is going to depend highly on your park and the players that you have. If you're running a quest for, say, Wolvenfang, you're gonna probably want a higher end level of combat just because of the kind of people who play there. The difficulty there is you have to know who your audience is, but we'll get back to that. So why write quests? There are 100,000 reasons. Basically, the best reason is because it's fun for you. But it can also, be a way you explain something in a story. We used quests to explain why we transitioned from V7 to V8, and it was a very, very popular quest line. You can use quests to rescue a friend or to go treasure hunting. The reasons to write a quest are endless, and there are so many cool things you can do with quests. Now, quest writing can seem like a huge task. Then there are a ton of moving parts to keep track of. But if you keep it simple, anyone can do a very beginner quest. So what are the parts of these quests? Well, let's start with the plot. I mean, everyone knows what plot is. I really shouldn't have to explain it over much. But basically, when you're writing a quest plot, you want to keep it kind of open-ended and not overly specific. If your plot takes 7 pages to explain, the PCs are going to lose interest real fast. So your plot could be something as simple as rescue the knight from the dragon. The next part of your quest type is tone. That's kind of like thinking, what genre of quest am I writing? Am I writing a mystery? Am I writing a horror quest? Am I writing a high adventure? Is this just a treasure seek? Is it silly and fun? Am I going to start?
I'm working on it.
Somebody
No, they don't work with this.
All right, Orlin, can you mute your mic?
Thank you.
Yes, I'm doing that now.
Thank you.
Sometimes people can't tell. So.
There we go. All right, so yeah, the tone of the quest is basically what genre. Think like in literary terms. I mean, you're not going to write a romance quest, Question mark? Oh, I guess you could. But just think of your tone as what style. Now, everyone's tone is going to be a little different, and you're going to have tones that you're better at than others. Some people are really great at horror. Some people are really good at high adventure. Experiment. Try different tones. Again, if you want to write a romance quest, I mean, more power to you. Now, the challenges are the next part of the quest. These are the fights, the puzzles, everything. You want to have some kind of balance between your fights, your puzzles. You can mix fights and puzzles and roleplay together. You might have in the rescue the dragon scenario, or rescue the knight from the dragon scenario. Maybe one of your challenges is convincing the dragon to, let this knight go, and it can take on the form of a roleplay. But if you screw up, now the dragon's mad and wants to eat you, right? So then it becomes a combat challenge. The challenges don't necessarily have to be perfectly well defined, and they can range from again, combat is the easiest one. You put monsters or other player type characters against each other. Go. That's a combat. Typically, your end boss is going to be some combination of combat and maybe combat plus puzzle or combat plus physical challenge. It really depends on how you're setting things up. The physical challenges are things like you can make traps. Usually that involves using people to be the traps for people to crawl through or get past. You can set planks of wood and say this is a rickety bridge. You can only cross one at a time. You can do things like archery competitions and aiming and stuff that is maybe combat adjacent, but not necessarily combat. These tend to add some fun and some challenge without it necessarily being about the fighting. The next kind of challenge is the stereotypical puzzle. They can come in the forms of word plays and riddles and basically anything you want. I am a big fan of taking dollar store puzzles and repainting them. Usually I get someone else to paint them because I'm not good at painting, but you can repaint them with your theme, right? Like, I once took a Rubik's Cube, had someone paint it, and on one side it was all suns, and you had to match the suns. That's an example of a puzzle. Puzzles tend to be a little bit prop heavy, though you can do just riddles, which don't usually require them. But props don't have to be expensive, and we'll get back to that in a minute. So that's... Oh, and then there's talking. Talking puzzles are a little more difficult to set up because you have to have NPCs that are good to react to you and who will roll with the punches. If you're doing a role-play scenario, you need an NPC who's willing to go with it. Now, NPCs, for those who are not familiar with that term, are non-player characters. Basically, they're your world. They're the characters in a video game you don't control. When you're choosing your NPCs, you have to make sure you choose people you trust and people who will do their best to help you. Well, we'll get back to choosing your NPCs in a minute. Finally, the last piece of your quest is the result. What do you want to happen? Do they have to defeat the dragon? Do they have to make peace with the dragon? Do they just have to stop the dragon somehow? And it's okay for players to fail. But if you let the players fail, you have to be ready to write another quest to let them try again. Which is why you should not do the end of the world scenario. One of the reasons. There's more reasons to it than that, but that's another thing for later. A lot of people I know will actually start at their result, their end goal, and they will work backwards so that they can kind of come up with challenges that make sense to the end goal. Or they start at the beginning. They start at, this is the story idea I want. I don't know how I want it to end, but I want to make sure I have these puzzles. Right? There's no wrong way to plan a quest. It's really up to what makes sense to you. I know lots of people who use the brainstorming things you used to do in like English class. I tend to write out overly complicated notes, throw out half of them, simplify it, and then go back and do it again. So that's the basic parts of your quest. Now, NPCs do not have to be monsters. You do not have to use any particular monster book. You can have all your NPCs be players with player stats. You can make up your own monsters. Basically, the sky's the limit for NPCs as long as you're basically keeping within the rules of play, and you aren't doing anything harmful. Now, quests typically come in a couple of different formats. So first, we're going to talk about ways to lose and lives. So one of these ways to lose is in a timed quest where you have, say, 2 hours to rescue the knight. 2 hours sounds like a lot of time, but depending on how many puzzles you have, it might actually be a very close call. I'm a very big fan of the time quest, especially in V8, where lives don't super matter. And when you do a timed quest, it's usually recommended you do death counts of between 1 minute and 5 minutes, which seems really long, but there are a lot of people with resurrects out there. And with a timed quest, you give them unlimited lives. Basically, the idea is they're fighting against the clock for whatever reason. Maybe it's this has to be done before sunset, or bad things happen. It gives you a definitive lose condition that the PCs can be aware of upfront because it's very straightforward, and it allows you to keep on time for events, which is why I super recommend this particular version of quests for large events, anything duchy sized and bigger. I've done several bot-D quests, and if you don't do timed, you're going to run over. End of story. The next kind of quest is life token quest. Life tokens are basically you take little gems, wooden cubes, whatever you want, to mark individuals' lives. Now, the life tokens can typically be traded or given, but they cannot be stolen. And if your character runs out of life tokens, you're dead. And you don't get back up again. You can't be resurrected. You're just dead. And then if everybody has no life tokens, the quest is over and they've lost. Again, that's a very straightforward lose condition that PCs can keep track of. It does require a dedicated Nirvana type Reeve NPC combination. But that can be really on point. I've done it with a goddess of the underworld, that kind of thing. That makes, sense for your story. So again, that's another one that's better for open role play or for more open-ended quests. You wouldn't want to combine, say, a timed quest and the life token quest. That gets to be a lot of nitty-gritty that you're then tracking for no real reason. And the last kind of life counter type game is a static lives. Basically, you assign everybody the same number of lives. They can't be taken, traded, nothing. Everybody has, say, 3 lives or 4 lives or 5 lives. That works fine in park level quests or in guided tiny quests where you can count on everyone to be honest with how many lives they have and have spent. But in larger event quests, like if you have more than 20 players, not typically a good choice. Now we come to kind of types of quests. You've got, these are like styles of how you're running the quest. So the first one is one I highly recommend for all beginners, and it's a guided quest. Now, this doesn't work for any more than about 8 PCs is about your maximum. And basically, you're the narrator. You wander around with the PCs. You describe what they see. Now, this has some really good benefits and some really severe drawbacks. The major drawback is you are basically railroading them. For those not familiar with that term, choo-choo! You are leading them where you want them to go, and they can't deviate. Or if they do, they have to deviate as a group. And that works really well for, say, you're trying to escape a cave, or you're crawling to the bottom of a cave, or things where it makes sense that you can only go one way. But guided quests don't work particularly well if you want it to be a more open feel. And they don't work well if you have more than 8 PCs because people want to split up. So it is really good, a good way to get your feet wet, but you'd want to do it for a smaller group. Works really great for Shire level quests. especially because then you can kind of pick up the slack and do multiple roles because you're always there. It even works for barony size, but I wouldn't do it for more than that. And again, it depends on how busy your quest is. Sandbox Quests is my personal favorite. This is kind of named after the Sandbox games. Basically, the idea is everything is there and available from the get-go. Players just have to go find it. It works really well when you have a lot of space. For instance, a Battle of the Dens. In your park, if you have a lot of space and you have a lot of available NPCs, it works really well to kind of spread out and make players figure out what's going on in a more open way. Finally, there's the timed or the event-based quest. And basically what that is that everything opens up when something else is completed before it. So it is less open than Sandbox, but not as narrow as the guided. It's kind of the halfway point. Most quests tend to fall on the phase or the time-based quest, and they are not truly Sandbox because that takes a lot of NPCs. So basically things happen or change either as time marches on or as things happen. Right? So maybe the thing that happens is they defeat the goblins. Well, now the goblins have all run away, and now it's orcs running around, right? So things have kind of graduated. And finally, there's guided roleplay. Now, this isn't technically a quest. It's more just, here's a little bit of plot to get you guys started, and then you walk away and they just go. That allows you to join as a player, and then you can kind of see where things are going. That tends to work best with people who are used to role-playing. Is not particularly new player friendly unless they have someone kind of guiding them, because they don't necessarily know what's going on. So guided roleplay is great for open roleplay at your field, but you wouldn't want to say do a guided roleplay bot-D quest or event quest in general. So now we're going to touch on the basic types of plots. When you are choosing your plot, I highly recommend a simple premise with low stakes. Now, basically what a stake is what is at risk. Low stakes might be you guys are going in to get these, little treasures. They're all scrolls or whatever, and at the end you get to keep them. Low stakes might be, oh, the neighbor's farm is flooding. We need to stop the floods. Or, hey, there's suddenly an overpopulation of rats. What is going on? Let's fix it. Medium stakes can be things like, oh, hey, my buddy is gone and kidnapped, and we need to get him back from the dragon. This company is missing. A whole company just up and disappeared. Higher stakes might be things like, hey, our city is being threatened. Because you can always destroy your local city as long as people are willing to roll with it. What you cannot do is say, oh, hey, guys, the world is ending. Because I hate to tell you, as much as QMs would like differently, we do not control all of Vanguard. So you cannot run a world-ending scenario where the actual world will end because you can't end it. And so the PCs are guaranteed to win, and that kind of breaks immersion. Right? If you hear, oh, this is the end of the world, you're just going to kind of roll your eyes and go, well, I know it's not, though, so no. You can, however, set up pocket planes, especially in longer character arcs or story arcs. You can be like, all right, this pocket plane is one that you guys have been questing in for the last 6 months, but now it's being threatened by something big and huge, and if you guys don't fix it, everyone in the pocket plane dies. That may or may not include the PCs. That's a good way for really high stakes to go on. But you just have to be careful about only destroying things that you can control. Which also means not doing things like, if there are established buildings or other things that are owned by other players, if you don't discuss it in advance, do not destroy their property. Because as much as it doesn't really exist, people put a lot of time and effort into imagining how things are. And if you just kind of say, explode. I'll use the example of the House of the Healing Way in Wolvenfang, a building that we blew up a lot, like a lot, and it was always with the understanding of the person who, quote unquote, owned it in character, and they were cool with it. But if they weren't, that's not a cool thing to do, right? You're not increasing other people's enjoyment if you threaten their stuff without their out of character permission in advance, right? So always be wary of that kind of thing. Yeah, you can blow up the city, but then there has to be means of fixing it, right? Yeah, so you want to keep your stakes realistic to the kind of quest you're running. And high stakes could be high for a specific group. If it's like you're running a quest for a company, one of their members is currently dead and they're trying to get them back, but they have to go down the river Styx, and if they screw up, they're dead too, also for 6 months, right? So you can up the stakes, but again, you want to have players' permissions to do those kinds of things. Now, they can be really fun, and if you think your character's life is legitimately on the line, it does make the quest more exciting, but only if that's what you want. Now, a note on tone. We touched a base on it really early. Tone is basically your genre and how you're communicating that. You can pull a fast one. You can start it seeming silly, and then suddenly somebody has opened up some kind of eldritch horror. But anytime you're delving into horror or even suspense, you have to make sure you're not triggering anyone's real life phobias or other issues. You don't want to have a bunch of undead kids around if, say, that really bothers someone for whatever the reason. And it doesn't matter what the reason is. Which means when you're starting horror or body horror, like anything, you want to make sure you know your audience well enough to not do something that's going to cause them problems. It means that horror doesn't typically happen in big quests because you just can't. It's just too difficult. Now, I have included in my notes, which I will make available when we're done here, a survey meant for tabletop, but it can easily be kind of pared down to, basically it works on a green light, yellow light, red light system. So green light is, hey, A-OK. So we'll use spiders as an example. Spiders are a basically horror trope. You could say, yep, spiders are green light, cool, not a problem. Yellow would be kind of off screen, so you might hear them in the distance, but you never actually see one. And red light is hard no. There cannot be mention of spiders. Spiders are just off the table 100%. And this questionnaire goes through a lot of different things, some of them more serious than others. But again, you really just don't want to be that jerk that sends someone into an actual panic attack. I have seen it happen once regarding spiders, and it happened in a night quest, and the person walked into a prop that was a Halloween spider, and then they had a panic attack, and it was awful for everyone. So you just don't want to do that. All right. And that brings us around to our audience. Your audience is obviously who's going to be playing in your quest. Now, in bigger quests, you're not going to be able to know your whole audience. So you're going to try and keep things as vanilla while still being threatening as possible. But you're not necessarily going to get into the nitty-gritty of certain things. You can't guarantee that you're not going to cause someone undue distress. So things you need to keep in mind when you're figuring out who your audience is. One is, how many people? Are you writing this quest for 5 people? 10 people? 60 people? How well do you know your audience? Is this an event so you're not going to know anybody? Or you might know a few people? Or is this a quest for your friends, your parkmates, your company, so that you actually do know everyone rather well? What tone is your audience expecting? Are you well known for doing, adventures on the high seas? do you want to keep with that expected tone, or are you going to surprise them? And then how well does your audience know each other? Players who know each other tend to do better together. And if they don't know each other very well, it's going to make things harder. Think of it like starting a new job. If you're starting a new job and you have to do a major presentation the day after you start, you're going to have a harder time. Right? So if you know your audience works well together, you can throw slightly harder things at them because you know they'll kind of pick up the slack for each other. If your party is a bunch of strangers, don't give them things that's going to rely on knowing each other, because that's just being a jerk. All right, we're on to choosing our NPCs. So NPCs can be broken into several kinds of groups. And there's kind of like two axes of groups. There's the combat, non-combat, and low combat group. And then there's the level of intricacy to the group. So as far as combat, non-combat, and low combat, those should be fairly self-explanatory. A combat NPC is going to be somebody who fights, whose major purpose is fighting. These could be anything from your goblins that are a mere nuisance to the end boss. Non-combat NPCs are PCs that do not engage in combat in any form. Typically, especially if there's a medical reason for it, or they just don't like to be hit, you should make sure they have some kind of gold ribbon marking them on their head or on their arm, so that they aren't struck by accident by people thinking, I hit it. And then there's the low combat NPCs. Those ones are, combat is not their priority. They're not supposed to get into combat, but they are people or monsters of some type that can be interacted with and stabbed. Because your NPC or your PCs will probably try and stab them. PCs like to stab things. Now, as far as your level of intricacy, you've got minion, which is kind of the base level. That's things like your goblins that don't necessarily hold any story, anything. They're there to be a challenge, and that's it. They don't really have any responsibility past that. You have your moderate level of intricacy. They might have relevant info. They might be a mini boss. They might be in charge of their little section. And then you've got your boss monsters. Boss monsters tend to be the end boss, or they might just be the boss of that section. Especially in a bigger, longer quest, you're going to have multiple bosses. And then the last kind is your Reeve. Now, this is not a Reeve like a tournament Reeve. This is not someone here to call shots. The Reeve level intricacy is there to make calls when you aren't there. In a quest of more than 15 PCs, you cannot be everywhere at once. Just end of story, cannot do it. So you need to have people at strategic locations who can make calls on your behalf. You don't have to mark them in any way. You just have to make sure you know who they are, that you can trust them, and that they have a solid understanding of, at minimum, their role and the roles of the surrounding area. For example, a couple of years ago, I did a Ragnarok-themed quest. All of my quote-unquote gods were Reeve level intricacy. They knew the plot. They were authorized in my name to make calls, and then they just had to inform me. So one of them was Loki, and he made up a spell on the fly to turn Thor's hammer pink and gave it to a PC. The PC used it on Thor, and Thor went, "All right, my hammer is now pink," and kept rolling with it. That spell didn't exist at the beginning. Loki made a call, and then Thor rolled with it. But they were all empowered to make those choices. Every last one of them. Now, there were some things they could not change, but those were few and far between, and they were basically just rules that I made them known ahead of time. But even then they could, if a PC asked them, well, what happens when I try this? They could answer. And you want to have people who are at that level, especially in the bigger quests. In small shire level or individual group level quests, that's not such a big deal. But if you want a full out quest, then you need, and by that I mean a big 20 plus people quest, you need to have a couple of people who are authorized to make calls on your behalf. Because again, you just can't be everywhere at once, and that's not a failing. That's just reality. Now, when you're choosing your NPCs, you have to ask a few questions of yourself and of them. So one of them is, what kind of NPC do they want to be? Because not everyone is good at everything. Do they want to be a combat NPC? Do they want to be a high magic but low stick NPC? That's fine too. You have to ask, how strong is their roleplay? Have they never NPC'd before or never roleplayed before? You probably don't want them to be a boss. You probably want them to be a minion so that they can get their feet wet, so to speak. Can they dial up or down their skill if the players are doing too well or not well at all? This is especially important if you're running quests for newer players. We do a newbie day in Wolven Fang. And I want my end boss to kind of respect the level of play that our newer players are at. Because it's not fun to be steamrolled into the ground over and over and over again and not see a way out. So you need, if you need them to be able to kind of up their game or down their game as is necessary to who is playing. You want them to be challenged, but you also don't want them to just be steamrolled because that sucks. Does your NPC candidate feel the need to always win? If they do, they're probably not good NPCs. NPCs by nature tend to lose. So if you've got a player that is very winning focused, they tend to get frustrated when the PCs win, even though that is clearly within their role. So if you've got someone who's hyper competitive, they're probably not a great NPC. How well do they know monster rules? The answer is probably not very, as a side note, because the monster rules are a mess. Now, you can mitigate some of that as a QM by taking out some things and just giving them standard rulebook abilities to replace it. But that requires that you have the time to edit your monster, or that you have time to teach them about their roles. Find whoever is GM of monsters in your park. Make sure they know the monsters and pair up with them whenever possible, even if they're not interested in NPCing, though I haven't ever met a GM of monsters who wasn't. They can at least teach some of those abilities, right? Can explain them. Make sure you familiarize yourself with some of those more esoteric abilities, or just never include them. And does your monster have any special kind of requirements or gear? Gear is easy. If you know, water elementals need flails. You can either, as a QM, decide, no, they don't. They can use swords. Screw it. They're actually part ice. Or you can make sure you have flails in advance. If they need a specific requirement, like you need to be a knight to play this, like Phoenix, if you don't have one of those on hand, maybe use a different monster. Because maybe the knight you were expecting isn't there. Maybe they get sick. Things happen. Life happens. When possible, if you're doing an event quest, so anything for a coronation, a mid-reign, anything bigger, pick your NPCs well in advance. Give them time to learn their stuff. Now, for a random, I wrote this quest today because we were bored, you don't have to put as much care into your NPCs because in the end, it doesn't really matter. You're just questing for fun. But if you're writing a quest for an event, you're going to want to have your NPCs chosen well in advance and work with people you know you can work with. Now we're moving on to props. Props don't have to be fancy. I've seen some very fancy, beautiful props. Bonnie makes some gorgeous ones. And they're great when you're doing a big event and you have a budget. But if you're just running a quest, just because odds are good you don't have a budget, it's whatever you have in your pockets. Or you can go to the dollar store and pick up, $4 or $5 worth of random stuff and make a quest out of that. There is a crafting triangle out there, and lots of people may be familiar with it. You can have any two of high quality, fast, and cheap. If you want something that is nice, you will need to have more time or more money. There's really no two ways around these things. So again, if you want those really fancy props, you're going to need to give lots of time or have lots of cash. And since most parks don't have a huge budget for questing, you just have to kind of roll with it. If you are doing a bigger event quest, especially like a coronation, or if you're expecting a lot of out-of-towners, try and have your props ready a month in advance, at least 2 weeks. That gives you time to find any last-minute things, and it means you're not pulling your own hair out. And for the love of all that is good, do not try and do it all yourself. Outsource. There is tons of people who love to make things if you give them enough warning. Right, and now here are some tips and tricks of things to do and to avoid. First, always start small and simple. Don't start your very first quest for, say, Battle of the Dens. I say this, and you think I wouldn't have to say this, but I say this because my woman-at-arms did that. Her very first quest was a Battle of the Dens, and she had all the support. She had me. She had 2 other people who are very high up the Smith chain who love questing, helping her out at every turn. But she still burned out huge because it was too much, too fast. Start smaller. Don't do Arcana. Don't be Arcana. 2, if you can't explain the basic premise of your quest in 5 or fewer sentences, it might be too complicated. PCs don't have the greatest attention spans, and you're often trying to give them information over people talking, people leading it, giving out enchantments. Players cause their own complications all the time, so it's best if you can keep your overall idea to under 5 sentences. Ragnarok, stop it or don't. Done. That's the entire premise of the quest. Now, there was obviously a lot more to it when it came down to it, but if you're describing it to a random person, 5 sentences or less. 3, people can play more than one role. In fact, I highly encourage it, but you need to have a way to indicate that they're a different character, different garb, even if it's just a different colored tabard, right? If someone's going to be doing multiple roles, they need to have indications of that. You can't have someone in a black tunic say, "Rawr, I'm a dragon," and then 20 minutes later when they're fighting him somewhere else, he's like, "Actually, now I'm a vampire," in the same black tunic. Wait, what? It doesn't have to be a lot. Just different colored tabards or tunics, whatever, can make a world of difference for players because we're fairly visually based. If you are running roleplay or quests and it becomes super emotional, good emotions, bad emotions, doesn't matter. Make sure you check up on your players when it's over, especially if you're doing horror. They may say they're okay with something, and then turns out it brought up something long buried and has set them off, and now they're crying in a corner, but they didn't want anyone to see and they're embarrassed. Please go find them, make sure they're okay. It doesn't have to be right away. It can be half an hour after your quest, an hour after your quest. Make sure you check up on your players if emotions get high. 5, have someone whose job it is to check up on you after a quest, especially if it's a bigger quest than you're used to running. Have someone there who can bring you a snack if you need it, or just keep you sane, because sometimes you feel like you're juggling knives and it's all going to come crashing down, and you just need someone outside of the structure to check in on you. Again, don't start with anything too grand, and at this point I'm not even talking about event quests. Don't decide you're going to run a 12 quest long arc as your first set of quests. A couple of one-shots will do. There's nothing wrong with one-shots. In fact, some of the best RP I've ever had was in quests that didn't connect to anything. The players will connect it to other stuff. It's good to do the one-offs. You can build up arcs as you go, but don't start there. And experiment. Play with your tone. Choose different people to NPC. Choose different plots. Do something you've never tried before. Do high sea treasure hunts for no reason, right? Just have fun. Quest writing, if it becomes a chore, you're not doing it for the right reasons anymore. Now, I mean, don't get me wrong. You can be high stress, but it doesn't have to be a chore, and there is a difference. And with that, I've pretty much covered everything I have planned. So I'm going to open up the floor for questions. Oops. Does anybody have any questions?
I had a question, but now I've forgotten it.
As a quest writer, what was the one moment that you were most proud of in one of your quests that like it really just turned out better than you could have imagined?
So a few years ago, I was doing a series of night quests and like a full Empire at the time wide plot line. And the people who ran Bot D didn't want me to do main quests, so I just took over the night. But I needed a way to indicate that the quest was starting because it wasn't officially on the schedule. So the whole quest centered around these void things. I had a bunch of my NPCs dress up all in black and run screaming through the tenting area and the ditch field, randomly stabbing a few people who knew it was coming in advance, and then disappearing into the woods to go finish their prep. And then I stood and waited for people to come. You would not believe how fast people geared up because some of their friends had been just randomly murdered to their eyes. And so it really helped with that immersion feeling, and that made me really happy. Any other questions?
The Fubard asks, what do you feel about the red herring NPC type?
So I'm actually okay with it, as long as they're not making it so that quest can't happen, right? Like, I've seen people who do the red herring too aggressively, but if they're just hanging out and players are willy-nilly following them, that's on the players. It's much like player versus player action. On one hand, I'm actually kind of okay with it because I know that in Antgard, the world as a society, everything is solved by fighting. You hate someone, you kill them. So I won't usually put a stop to it in, say, a quest unless it is stopping the quest from moving forward. And then it's just a quiet talking to all involved out of character. And again, the red herrings are fun. I've seen them do really silly things and I kind of like it. As long as, again, everybody's having fun and they aren't causing things to spiral in a way that is detrimental to everyone's fun. Also, if the rocking is making you motion sick, I apologize, but the infant is now sleeping.
Oh no, that's all good.
Any other questions?
How do you handle, this is from Delilah, how do you handle a player who seems to be making other players uncomfortable or trying to take over a quest?
Well, if I see someone making someone uncomfortable, I'm going to go talk to them out of character. As far as taking over a quest, I'm not quite sure what you mean. Are they overshining everybody else? Like nobody's getting a chance to talk? Is that what you mean?
They're typing. I'll read it out for you when they. Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
But yeah, if someone is making someone uncomfortable, they need to be asked to stop. Usually that's best handled out of character. Basically, take whatever you're playing as QM, step down for a minute, pull them aside. Try not to make a big deal about it. Just try and get them to cut it out. And if it's absolutely harmful behavior, because I have seen absolutely harmful behavior, I have kicked people out of quests. I have seen people too drunk to quest, doing things like at Bati jumping off rocks and in places that are not safe when you can see, and at night it is super dangerous. I've kicked them out of quests. I've had people who, again, usually it's because they're drunk, get not quite verbally abusive, but definitely skirting the line. And I've just said, you need to leave. You're done. Goodbye. And they will inevitably throw a fit, but you have to stand up for the protection of everybody.
I find it very hard to believe there are drunk people at Bot D.
I think the worst idea I see sometimes is when drunk people try to get into a deep conversation. That's a disagreement.
Drunken Iron Man.
Yeah, usually these are the kinds of people who are risky players to begin with. Like they like to do stupid things like climb trees and shoot arrows from them. But then when you add drunk to that, it's a recipe for bad, and you should just tell them it's time to leave. You're done in this quest. Get out. And if you don't listen to me, I will be escalating it.
There is some more typing. If there are questions, I will relay them.
Yeah, I see lots of typing. I've managed to figure out how to get the... I am scared. I have the disappointed mom voice down to a science. It works for me. Yeah, but if someone is legitimately doing anything actually dangerous or putting people ill at ease and they won't stop, they need to get out of your quest. And I know it can be really hard to stand up to people, especially if they're friends, even if they're not. But when you're a QM, you are responsible for the safety of your players on some level.
That's when it's handy to have radios and be in contact with
Yeah.
the security people too.
I usually have a radio. Often I make one of the security people an NPC so that they're on hand. Or I have other, non-security people who are bigger and scarier than me, because everyone is bigger and scarier than me.
I wouldn't say not more scarier.
Well,
I mean, your picture's a pretty serious look.
You just have to say one phrase and people run away.
okay, yeah, but that doesn't work when I'm trying to be...
No, I mean,
Yeah, that would be my tone. As a side note, for those who are not aware, I do creepy. Lots of creepy quests. So when I do really complex puzzles, there's always a backdoor. Unless it's for something that is not plot required. So I might do a super complex puzzle for, say, a trinket. You get past this, you can have a trinket. Cool beans. But if it's required to advance the story, typically I do something like 3 strikes, you're out, and then it will summon a combat. My favorite was at a Team Tactics years ago. They had a puzzle, and the answer was spiders. When they failed to get the answer in 3 shots, it summoned spiders and they had to fight them. So always have a backdoor for really complex puzzles, unless it's something you're cool with them taking months to do. So it might be they find this puzzle as part of a storyline and they can just solve it in their own sweet time, then just leave it. But typically 3 strikes, you're out. Here's a fight instead. If I don't think it's that difficult and players just aren't getting it, then hopefully they can find other things to work around it. I had a newbie quest, and the answer to the riddle was bubbles. No one got it, despite the fact that the NPC was actively blowing bubbles with a bubble wand. They failed that section of the quest because I gave them as many hints as I could, and they still weren't getting it. So failure is a thing. Now that particular quest was to regain memories for other players, so it just meant that one of the players is missing a set of memories. It was just a partial fail.
That was a
I had a
fun
question.
quest. Go ahead, ask your question.
Oh, okay. So I've never done like an at-field quest yet. As the GM, or I believe you called them Reeves. Like, where are you? Are you just like following along, like not playing, or like how does narration work? I don't understand.
Okay, so there's different styles you can do it in. If you are the narrator type, that guided quest that I recommended as a start point, you're basically a DM like in Dungeons and Dragons. You're following them, you don't exist. You're just explaining things. If you're doing an open sandbox quest, typically you're wandering around like a reeve. Players can ask questions of you and you can make calls, but you're not necessarily a PC or an NPC, sorry. Or you might be a static NPC, so you're standing in a place where all the players can see you, and you alternate between answering questions as your NPC, and then if they need the QM, you can just be the QM. I usually do the last one, where I have a role, especially on field, like not in an event quest. In an event quest, I'm just a wandering reeve, and I will answer things as I go. But on a local field day, I'm not usually the boss because that gets complicated, but I might be an NPC that they need to come talk to. And then if one of my other NPCs has a problem, they can just flag me down. It's hard to imagine if you have never done any kind of quest, but basically you're not a player most of the time. You're just there, you answer the questions, you might hang out at Nirvana and count lives for people, or you might just wander around and talk to your NPCs and make sure everything is going well. But yeah, does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think I'm just more nervous about it because I've never done it in person.
Well, you know what? My first quest was awful, if it makes you feel better. And I have 10 Smiths now, and 9 of them are for quest writing. So it's okay if your first one doesn't go well. You learn and you move on. Losing a big event quest, yeah or nay? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I like it when my PCs lose. But that being said, typically what I do is if there is a lose condition, there is a secondary quest written to partially redeem it. I will give the example of a quest I wrote years and years ago where I was doing night quest Friday, main quest Saturday, and night quest Sunday. But I wrote 4 quests because the night quest on Sunday was dependent upon whether they won or lost the main quest on Saturday. I'm not necessarily recommending that level of craziness to someone who's new, but as long as the penalty for losing is something that is within your ability to do as a DM or as a QM, let them lose. People learn more from losing. I mean, don't write it so that they're going to get grounded to the ground and there's nothing they can do about it. But a loss because they didn't manage their time correctly, not your fault. The quest that I wrote the 2 endings for, there was 6 seconds left on the clock when they won. That was it. More typing coming in? Yeah, you know that one. You were in that one. But yeah, definitely let your players lose. There's nothing wrong with it. Just be aware that if their players lose, it's more work for you because you now have to continue the story. Any other questions?
For a sandbox, because
Mhm.
our park has a really big park. It's like it's like there's actually like maybe 5 other parks inside our park.
Okay.
Like how would you go about, marking where the like edges are? Like if you didn't want to like go all the way.
So
With,
on a regular park day, I would probably just verbally tell people, don't go past X, Y, and Z. Another good way to mark is flagging tape. You can get it at a lot of outdoor stores. It's little like rubbery tape that you can tie to trees. Or you can get the like flags you can put in the Dollarama too. Or you can get those little flags you can put in the ground is another way to mark it. But honestly, for just random quests on a field day, I would just tell people, hey guys, quest is within this area. Don't bother going that way or that way. There's nothing there. That'd be how I would handle it. Because there's always a part at the beginning of quests, and I didn't really cover this, but I probably should have. At the start of a quest, either you or one of your NPCs typically runs down with the players why they are here, any rules you need to tell them. Like if you're using terrain, you need to tell them because it's not regular stuff. If there's any weird monster abilities that you're afraid that they really don't understand, and how many lives or how lives are working or what the timer is, right? Like you're going to have some out of character stuff to give them first, and then you launch into the description and then they can go. So in that like out of character nonsense, you can be like, hey, by the way, there's nothing past the 2 trees on the left. Everything is over to the right. That kind of thing. Any other questions? Otherwise, I think I will wrap up and let Natasha get to her class.
Well, thank you, Finola, for coming out and talking to us about writing quests. It was wonderfully informative, and I really do need to write some quests.
I will be posting my notes in this chat, and anyone who wants them can take them. And again, they'll come with some videos, so if you want to learn more, there's some really good ones.
Thank you for both for the class and for the additional resources that you've provided.
You are welcome. Yeah, I'm also a good soundboard, so anyone who wants to talk questing, just message me, and I'll answer whenever I have a chance.
Really, Fugard, you changed that? Because I'm pretty sure that was a pretty accurate original statement.
I did like that original statement. Well done. All right. And with that, I'm gonna take off my quester hat, and it's wizard time.
Thank you, Finola.